Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 240 of the All Dolphins podcast on this Friday, March 8th, 2024. We are about to head into the teeth of free agency next week. We're also already have started with draft season. NFL Combine was just last week, which explains the presence to our right on the screen of long time guys I've known for a very long time. Longtime draft analyst Tony Pauline now with Sportskeeda. Tony, how are you, bud?
I'm okay, Sportskeeda. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I go back with Tony back to the Hurricanes when they were actually good.
Yeah.
Back into the 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004. That was back in the actually good era when people actually cared what kind of talent was coming out of there. Unfortunately, they've fallen off and haven't gotten back up.
My how times have changed, and I think that was apparent last week at the Combine, where the guys you thought Cam Kitchens and James Williams, who you thought would do well, were just bad.
Oh, they did not perform well.
No, they ran slow 40 times.
Of course. I mean, Wilson's like a jumbo-sized safety. Any thinking maybe he moves to linebacker in the NFL?
I think that is his position. That's the position he played at during Senior Bowl practices, and rightfully so. He didn't do as good a job as I thought he would have done. But yeah, he's got to be a linebacker. I mean, you look at him, he's basically a traditional strong safety, which is a position that's rarely used in the league anymore. Ravens, a couple of teams use it. And more we're seeing these oversized college safeties be moved up to linebacker. So that is the ultimate destination for James Williams of the Miami Hurricanes.
Personal note, Tony and I go back further than that. I think in the early 90s when I was the editor of Draft Digest, and Tony was my draft experts back in the day. Like I said, we're talking 90s, so we're talking 30 years. Yeah, my times have changed indeed. Before we talk about this year's prospects, I want to pick your brain. Do you recall, and what were your recollections of Davian Nixon, the defensive tackle out of Iowa, who the Dolphins signed on Thursday, who was the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year in 2020? Is there something there?
I mean, quick, explosive guy. I think he's more of a rotational player than someone who's going to be a consistent starter. He was always your typical Iowa defensive lineman. And the guys you get out of there are very workmanlike, very blue collar. And that's what his game is like.
Mm-hmm. Now let's get into some of these drafts and some of the drafts information. What's the wind that was blowing from the Combine? I want to get your take on Marvin Harrison basically saying, I'm not doing anything draft related in this process, and basically screw you NFL, take me or don't take me.
It's not a smart move. I mean, he's the highest rated player on my board. He's the highest rated player on just about everybody else's board. But when he's not doing anything else, and you're going to see Jaden Daniels work out, you're going to see Caleb Williams work out, you're going to see Malik Neighbors work out. What that does is it reduces the gap between Marvin Harrison and those other players. And if he's coming off as having a bad attitude, and it's a question of, for the Arizona Cardinals, are they taking him or Malik Neighbors? And Malik Neighbors of LSU has done everything that teams have asked him, or say the Cardinals have asked him. All of a sudden now a conversation is, would they take Malik Neighbors over Marvin Harrison? The irony is this. I was at the pro day last year, the Ohio State pro day, with Stroud and Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Marvin Harrison worked out at that pro day. And one thing I noticed was he wasn't as good a route runner as Jackson Smith-Njigba. Few are. And what I mean was he would throttle down, slow down getting in and out of his routes. And what I heard was over the summer, all he did was work on his 3-cone time and his short shuttle time to get those times down. And that had been reported really throughout the preseason. And here it is, time to run the 3-cone and the short shuttle. And he's like, the heck with you, I'm not going to do it. So he's getting bad advice somewhere, whether it's from his father, he doesn't have an agent, somebody else. This is a huge job interview. Okay, that's what the pre-draft process is. It is a major job interview, whether it's the athletic testing, the psychological testing, just the interviews, the medical testing. And when you're telling future employers, no way, that's going to leave a bad taste in people's mouths.
But let me ask you this question, Tony. His father's been in the NFL.
Yep.
He's always had money.
Right.
What if he doesn't care how high he goes, but more who drafts him?
Yeah, I mean, that's a possibility. I mean, listen, Ohio State offered him almost $20 million to return and play in Columbus this year, in 2024.
20 million 1 year?
Yeah, the NIL deal that they were offering him was close to the contract that he would have received. So, and that's where the NILs are going. So you're right. I mean, money obviously isn't an option. I don't know that he really has any say or any control as to where he's going to go. Whether it be the New England Patriots or the Arizona Cardinals. You got to be careful with that. Receiver is a priority position. It's a much higher rated position than in the past. But unless you're Eli Manning or somebody like that, and even that leaves a bad taste in people's mouths.
Yeah, it's one of those where teams are going to have to do their homework with Ohio State, make sure he's coachable, make sure he wasn't disruptive with the teammates and stuff like that.
I've not heard that he was. I've not heard that at all, and I don't want to give that impression. But this, and in fact, if you remember, I mean, he was really considering going back to Ohio State because, as he said, he's never beaten Michigan. And that is a big thing at Ohio State. When you go through your career at Ohio State and you never beat Michigan, that's something that you're going to look back on and regret. Obviously, I think he made the best decision moving on to the NFL. But the decisions he's made since then are questionable.
Let me ask you, Tony, moving on from this, because I think, this is a different era of player, especially when you're telling me a college kid is getting offered $20 million for 1 year to go remain in college football. He should have took that money and came to the NFL later. But with these quarterbacks, and we know that the quarterbacks have already been compensated by their college programs.
Sure.
How much do you think Caleb Williams is a lock for the #1 pick? And do you think that any of the other quarterbacks could be closing, maybe Jaden Daniels or Drake May can be closing ground on him? Or do you think he's absolutely without a doubt going to Chicago?
I'd be shocked if the Chicago Bears do not select Caleb Williams. I'd be absolutely shocked. Caleb Williams, I don't want to say he pulled the Marvin Harrison at the combine, but what he said is, listen, I'm just going to do it for one team because I know that this one team is going to take me. So if it's not 100% that Caleb Williams ends up with the Chicago Bears, it's 99%. Jaden Daniels has been phenomenal. I mean, Jaden Daniels coming into, as the season ended, Drake May was my #2 quarterback. When I watched the film, it was Jaden Daniels. Can Jaden Daniels close that gap to Caleb Williams? Possibly. I mean, the guy has played great football the past 2 years. His game is on the upswing, and teams usually like the quarterbacks that are on their way up. He may be able to close the gap, but I don't think he's going to surpass Caleb Williams, although you may hear some talk about that before the draft. I think Drake May is he could be on the outside looking in. If you read my article at Sportskeeda yesterday, I talked about how teams are hot and cold on Drake May. There are some teams that are not sold on Drake May. And when I released my mock draft this morning at sportskeeda.com, I actually had Drake May falling to the 6th selection of the draft in the New York Giants. I had the New England Patriots taking Marvin Harrison. So there is a lot of concern. Well, I don't want to say there's concern, but I think Drake May has kind of fallen off. I think it was a big mistake that he did not throw at the combine. And if you watch Drake May, his game kind of tailed off at the end of the 2023 season, I think in large part because he was getting the crap beat out of him and he tried to do too much. And I know for a fact that when they had his teammates in interviews at the combine, Quantez Walker, the receiver, they were asking as much about Drake May as they were about that specific prospect. So if there's a quarterback that could actually fall off come draft day, I think it's going to be Drake May.
Mm-hmm. And how many quarterbacks would you say safely make it? Oh, was that your question? Because I wanted to wrap up.
No, that wasn't my question. But by all means, go ahead.
How many quarterbacks do you say, Tony, safely make it into the first round? Like you would wager your life, these guys are in the first.
Jesus, serious much? Holy moly.
I guess. I mean, depends on how people have different values on my life. So I think 4 quarterbacks are going to be selected in the first round. I think only 3 are worth first round picks. That would be Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May. But we see how quarterbacks are overdrafted. As I wrote this morning in my mock draft at Sportskeeda, I was told in Indianapolis, Sean Payton actually loves J.J. McCarthy. I think he's the 4th quarterback selected. I am not a big McCarthy guy. Could Michael Penix fall into the late part of round 1? It's less than 50-50. I'm not big on Penix either because of the injuries, because of the age, although we had a terrific combine passing workout. He's kind of up and down when you watch the game film. I'm going to say 4 right now, the 4th quarterback being J.J. McCarthy.
I'll take the over, but I'm not betting my life on it. I'll take the over on that. Tony, who did you mock to the Dolphins and why? And who could be other possibilities?
I had them taking Jackson Powers Johnson, the center from Oregon. I really didn't have a lot of other possibilities. I thought early on they could look at Jatavian Sanders of Texas. Don't know that he's a first-round pick right now. Maybe he squeezes into the last couple of selections, the tight end from Texas. I think Jackson Powers Johnson checks off a lot of boxes. I mean, he's a guy who was terrific at right guard for Oregon in 2023. They moved him to center this year, had a terrific campaign at center, went to the Senior Bowl, played the first day of the Senior Bowl, even though he was injured, was absolutely knockout that one day of practice he had at the Senior Bowl. Second day, he was a little bit off, but he was injured. I mean, he's big, he's tough, he's smart, he's strong at the line of scrimmage. He shows the ability to get out to the second level. So I think that's an interior lineman center that they could use, but I also think will come in right away and start and give them immediate production.
I can tell you, I was at this combine interview along with 2 other Dolphin beat writers, and he got done, and we all looked at each other and go, "Please, Dolphins, take him, take him, yeah. Take him." The guy is great personality. Not that it matters.
I will tell you this: the one thing, and I wrote this in my mock draft. I know the Pittsburgh Steelers are also very high on Jackson Powers Johnson. So there's a chance. I think he'll be there, but there is a slight chance he may be off the board by the time the Dolphins are called to the clock.
Another name I heard, another name I heard was Troy Fautanu, possibly the tackle from Washington, who could conceivably play some guard as well. Right. What I'm also hearing is the odds that he's there at 21 may not be great. Right. If he may go after, is that about right?
You know, it's kind of funny you say that because, again, I go back to my mock draft. I think I had him going, I believe it was to the Baltimore Ravens, but I did write in the mock draft that there is a lot of thought he could go between picks 10 to 20. So, there is a chance he could eventually be a top 20 pick, an outstanding left tackle. I think you're going to draft Fautanu at this point, even though I've had him as a guard. If he goes top 20, you're drafting him as a tackle. Came in with longer than expected arms, a little bit taller. With some question, is he 6'3.5"? Is he 6'4"? Sometimes teams want their left tackle to be a little bit taller. Was an exceptional player at left tackle for Michael Penix. Even though he did struggle in that championship game, that last game of the year against Michigan. But overall, yeah, he's one of those guys, as I noted in my mock draft, could end up going a lot earlier than people think.
How many offensive linemen do you think makes it in the first round? And I want to ask you specifically about the Alabama offensive lineman, J.C. Latham. Do you trust drafting an Alabama offensive lineman?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, to answer your first question, let me count right here. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I have 10 offensive linemen being selected in the first round. 8 of them are offensive tackles. The guy who, in my opinion, is on the outside looking in, but is getting a lot of chatter, is Graham Barton of Duke. I'm not sold that he's a first rounder. Played left tackle at Duke. Some people like him at guard. Some people like him at center. You know, it's an interesting thing what you say about Latham. The thing that concerns me about Latham is the size. He is just so big. And it's easy, unless, you're the Falele kid from Minnesota, It's very difficult to play in the NFL when you're in excess of 360 pounds. Very, very difficult. Look what's going on. What happened with Mekhi Becton and the New York Jets.
Yeah.
So that size, that huge size, does really concern me. I'll tell you, it's not so much Alabama. You watch the guy; he plays with great fundamentals. He's not just someone who mauls people. He bends his knees. He uses his hands well. He's good in pass protection. But you look at Evan Neal with the New York Giants, came in at 355 pounds. That's got to be a concern for teams because he's really going to have to get that weight down some 20 to 25 pounds and keep it off to be effective at the next level.
I do want to mention something real quick about Fautanu. If the Dolphins were to wind up taking him, to me, what would make sense is you play him at left guard his first year, and then move him to left tackle when Teron Armstead is done, a la Laramie Tunsil, what they did back in 2016. If the Dolphins decide to go defense at 21, who might be some of the guys who kind of spot there? Would it be Newton for the DT from Illinois? We're going to go cornerback back to back?
Yeah, I mean, I like Newton. I like Newton more than a lot of other people. He is, in fact, as we are taping this right now, he's working out at his pro day. Didn't do anything at the combine. He is the 20th rated player on my board. Thing about Newton is, 6'1.5". I don't know how much growth potential he has. I think he's being undervalued because if you watched Illinois this season, even when it's late in the fourth quarter and the game is already, the game is no longer in doubt, even when Illinois was losing, he's playing hard. He's making a lot of plays behind the line of scrimmage. He was the guy who, teams were focusing on. The problem with him is he's 6'1.5", 300 pounds. Is he a three technique? Is he a one gap? What kind of system? Can you put him at defensive end in a three-man front? So I think that's a guy. I think it has to be in consideration when you look at what the Dolphins' needs are, but you have to look at the system fit. Is he the Christian Wilkins type? Is he going to fill in that role if they don't bring Wilkins back? As far as cornerbacks, I mean, they could eventually have their pick of the litter there. Slight chance Terrion Arnold of Alabama's there. I like Quinton Mitchell. Everyone likes Quinton Mitchell, who, people fell in love with him at the Senior Bowl. He had a real good combine, but the fact is he's been a real good player. He was a real good player for 3 years at Toledo, the cornerback. He could eventually be the first top cornerback off the board. And then you got to wonder about Kool-Aid McKinstry with that Jones fracture. When is he going to be ready? I like McKinstry's game a lot. I really like him a lot. And I think he's got a lot of upside. I think people devaluing him. You look at the injury, you got to figure out when he's going to be ready, if he's going to be able to stay healthy. And there'll come a point in time where the reward outweighs the risk if McKinstry starts to fall down draft boards.
Mm-hmm. So you're drinking the Kool-Aid on McKinstry. Sorry. Had to be done. Sorry. Tony, what did you think of Cam Smith when he was coming out of South Carolina? Because we're kind of curious as to whether there's something there as well.
Great athlete, a lot of upside, decent player, very mature off the field. And I had reported that. A lot of issues with him off the field. Doesn't prioritize football. He's got to get his act together. If the light goes on with that guy, Dolphins have hit a home run in the second round. If he continues the way he's been going, he's one of those guys that's just going to bounce from roster to roster to roster and never meet the expectations that scouts have of him.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you a little bit more pressing questions about these defensive tackles because in this draft, more than likely Miami Dolphins have let Christian Wilkins escape and hit free agent market. It's going to be hard to retain him just because it's going to be a bidding war. How many defensive tackles would you say are in the top 50 selections in this draft and the caliber of them? Does everybody fit every scheme?
You got Byron Murphy of Texas, who's going to be a top 15 pick. We just spoke about Newton. Darius Robinson, is he defensive end? Is he an edge rusher? He's almost 290 pounds. I count him as a defensive tackle or at least a two-gap end. Then there's a fall-off. Then you have Tavondre Sweat, who's going to be a second-round pick. Sweat is an explosive gap eater in the middle, space eater in the middle of the line, who's very quick, who makes a lot of plays. We talked about the weight with J.C. Latham. It's also an issue with T'Vondre Sweat. There was talk that he was upwards of 390 pounds at the Senior Bowl. I think his combine weight was 363 pounds or something like 362 pounds. That could be an issue. Is a guy like that going to be able to play 4 quarters and play 4 quarters well? McKinley Jackson, 6'1" out of Texas A&M, 6'1 and a half, over 330 pounds. Similar type of player. Very quick, very explosive. Guy who makes a lot of plays behind the line of scrimmage. Guy who also occupies the gaps. The guy that I would keep an eye on, somewhere late in round 2, and I know I'm going to butcher his name, and I apologize, is Rook Ororu of Clemson, who's moving up draft boards. 6'4", 290 pounds. He's got growth potential. He was one of my risers from the combine. He was a good player for 3 years at Clemson. Could have come out in last year's draft, decided to go back for a second senior year. Very athletic. He's got a lot of upside. He's one of those guys that I think is a rookie. You're going to use him early on in a rotational system. By the end of the year, he could be starting. By year 2 or 3, he could be a real good, productive starting defensive tackle in the league.
For just to follow up on this defensive tackle, the Braden Fisk, obviously he lit up the combine, just showcasing his athleticism. How good of a player does the film say that he is?
Wow. Well, again, you watch the film, he's an outstanding player. He was an outstanding player last year at Florida State. He was a good player at Western Michigan before that. He was a go, go, go type of guy. The problem is what position is he going to play on Sunday? What is his real playing weight? Because he was, at one time under 280 pounds. Is he solely a 3-technique guy, 3-technique, 1-gap defensive tackle? Is he going to be able to take the pounding on the inside of a NFL against an NFL offensive line, for 4 quarters? There's some injury concerns that I heard of, and I reported at the combine. People obviously should fall in love with this guy's motor because he plays nonstop and he makes plays all over the place. Not just in the backfield, changes direction, gets outside into space. But you're trying to project this at the next level, and as a projection at the next level, I don't know that he's anything more than a 3-technique type of tackle who can be a rotational type of guy. He's going to have to get bigger. He's going to have to get stronger. He's going to have to show the fact that he can be physically resilient and take the pounding on an NFL level, which, ACC is good, but he's not going you're not going to have the same type. You're going to be going against much higher caliber of competition on Sunday.
What round you got him in?
Believe it or not, I have him as a 4th-round pick right now. I know people are falling in love with him. I think he only had like 31-inch arms, which isn't a huge deal for defensive tackles. Although, you want longer arms to help protect yourself. And then there's the injury issues. I have him right now as a late 4th-round choice.
What's the weakest position in the draft, and why is it safety?
I don't know. Why is it? Why is it safety? Because all the players in the position stink. That's why it's safety. It's not a good tight end class. You've got 2 or 3 guys at the top, then it really falls off the cliff. It's not really a good center class. After Jackson Powers Johnson, it really falls off a cliff there. I'm sorry?
Zach Frazier.
But Zach Frazier's more of a 3rd-round type player. I mean, you got Jackson Powers Johnson going in the 1st round. You may not have a pure center go for another 2 rounds. It's not a good running back class. There'll probably be more day 2 safeties selected than there will be day 2 centers. I mean, why is it no good? I mean, there's no top-rated guy. It's a situation where I think in large part your better defensive backs in college are now moved to cornerback or placed over the slot receiver as nickel backs, and they're not really developing the safeties. I do like Kalen Bullock of USC. I think Bo Braid of Maryland is a bit of a sleeper. Javon Bullard, I thought, showed well from Georgia, showed well at the combine. He's also real good on film. Jaden Hicks of Washington State, good player on film, had a decent combine. I think all those guys fit into day 2.
And the aforementioned Kitchens would be what, about day 2?
No, I think Kitchens with that 4.65 is moved into day 3. I liked him off the film as a potential 3rd-round choice. But, defensive backs that run 4.65 don't end up in day 2 of the draft.
Now, what if you position him to make the move to linebacker, which I'm not necessarily certain that he can do, but
Kitchens or Williams?
Kitchens. That's a no for you on Kitchens.
No,
Kitchens definitely going to move to linebacker.
Yeah, Williams will move to linebacker. Kitchens, I don't think is not big enough to move to linebacker.
Okay. Where are we with the receivers in this draft? I'm looking for the Dolphins obviously have 2 upper echelon speed receivers. They need a physical Jarvis Landry like slot receiver. Do you see any of those in this draft?
Jarvis Landry. Omar's like this.
It's a type. I got a type. Do you see any physical chain moving slot receivers in this draft?
If you want the bigger slot receiver, I mean, if Keon Coleman of Florida State is there in round 2, I think that's somebody you got to look at. I like Cornelius Johnson of Michigan a lot. I think there's a lot of untapped potential there. 6'2.5", 210 pounds. Ran much faster at the combine than anybody thought. Had 3 terrific days of practice at the Shrine Bowl where he showed he's more than just a contested catch receiver. He ran decent routes. He was able to separate, fundamentally sound catching the ball, which means he extends his hands and snatches it away from his frame rather than letting the ball get inside him. I mean, Brendan Rice of USC a little bit later on, a taller guy who, can win out for the contested throw. I mean, if you're looking for that type of guy, I like Cornelius Johnson. I have him as a 4th-round pick, but the way he worked out at the combine, I think late 3rd round is justifiable for his talents. And he's been a good receiver. I mean, he's well-liked in the scouting community. He was a guy who came into the 2022 season with high grades from scouts, kind of fell off a bit. But, I mean, if you watch that Michigan offense, they didn't throw the ball that much because they didn't need to. They had such a great running game with so many outstanding offensive linemen, which, is going to be a big question about J.J. McCarthy. But I think there's a lot of untapped potential there with Cornelius Johnson of Michigan.
I'm going to ask you about somebody very specific because I remember last year USC had a guard who was viewed as a good prospect, except he blew out his knee pre-draft. The Ravens picked him in the 6th or 7th round. His name escapes me right now, but it's one of those where down the line that's a move that could pay off. And I'm wondering whether Zach Zinter, the guard from Michigan, fits a little bit into that mold because he broke a bone in his leg. Is he one of those who could be somebody you pick for down the road a little bit?
Well, he's probably going to go much earlier. I had been reporting. First thing is the guy from the Ravens that you were talking about was Andrew Voorhees, and he actually tore his knee up. I don't mean to laugh. During combine workouts, if you remember, he was doing combine positional drills. He tore his knee up, and then the final day of the combine, he hopped on the bench with one leg. I think he did 38 reps. As far as Zach Zinter is concerned, Zinter broke his leg in the Ohio State game. I'm told it's a clean break, and I don't know when he's going to be back. I don't know what that means as far as him being ready for football contact, but I still think Zach Zinter is very likely to be a day 2 pick in that 3rd round area. And Zach Zinter was the best offensive lineman on what was a great offensive line at the University of Michigan. He's more of your power gap type of blocker, although he moves reasonably well. Showed the ability to get out in the 2nd level and take on linebackers. He's a mean, nasty, thick, powerful guy. I think for the Dolphins, not being able to do anything in the pre-draft process kind of hampers the ability to see if he fits their system as far as his movement skills and things like that. But Zinter's going to be a 3rd round. It's a day 2 pick somewhere in the 3rd round.
Mm-hmm. Now, is this a draft, Tony, where you think it's going to be easier to move up or easier to move down?
Well, I mean, it depends. I think when the quarterbacks, I think it's going to be tough to move up to get a quarterback. I think, as you can hear, my dog in the background going crazy. I think
yes, with the dog in the background.
I don't think. I think it's going to be tough to move into the top 3, depending on what happens with Drake May. I had reported that Sean Payton really wanted to move up and get a quarterback. What I'm hearing about Drake May now, that 3rd pick may be in play. I don't think it's always easier. You usually have more sellers than buyers. You usually have more teams that are looking to move down rather than to move up. And the reason they don't move down is they just don't get the value that they believe is justified or they need for that pick. So I'm going to say it's going to be easier to move up rather than down, because a lot of times teams want to move down, but they don't get the value in return that they feel they are justified for in the selection that they're trying to move.
And this applies to the Dolphins, who don't have a pick in round 3 and round 4 right now. And if in an ideal world would be able to move back a little bit, get some more picks, and replenish their stock of young ascending players, which is kind of dry right now. Or pretty dry.
Right. And the thing is, we talk about Jackson Powers Johnson. We talk about, you asked me about some of the defensive players. They may not value those guys that highly, which could make a trade down possible. And then they get moved down into the second round, get a third round pick back, and then go from there.
Mm-hmm. Well, Tony, this is always my favorite part of the conversation whenever I'm talking to you. I want you to give me your prospects on your list. These are your guys. These are your Julian Hills, because I know you are a big Julian Hill fan in the draft process. These are your guys that you put your name on in this draft. Doesn't have to be a first rounder. Could be a late round guy. Tell me who you like it.
I figured you were going to ask me my favorite Led Zeppelin album, but that's okay.
No, this guy will ask your favorite.
We all know it's Ford, isn't it, Tony?
I'm sorry?
We all know it's Led Zeppelin Ford, isn't it?
No, it's Physical Graffiti.
Okay.
You're way off. I like Ford, but Physical Graffiti. Okay, getting back to the question. A guy that I'm sure you guys are a player that you guys are both familiar with, Tylan Grable of Central Florida, who was a terrific left tackle for UCF for the past couple of years, has kind of fallen under the radar in what is a tackle-rich class. Outstanding pass protector, probably isn't going to go until the 5th round. Some people think he can play guard, had an outstanding combine workout, and he's kind of overlooked because, as usual, people are talking about the first round tackles or the top 45 tackles, and this guy's going to go day 3, and this guy can play at the next level. Mike Sanistrill, the defensive back from Michigan, kind of reminds me of a poor man's version of Tyrone Matteau, in the sense that he's a smaller guy. He gets overlooked, but all he does is make play after play after play. Terrific ball skills, plays big football, even though he's about 5'9" and a half. Really competitive and also smart. You're looking for a defensive tackle, day 3 guy. Remember this name, Christian Boyd out of Northern Iowa. I wrote an article right after the combine invitations were made public. This was my number 1 combine snub. 6'2", 320 pounds, just blew up 3 days of Shrine Bowl practice where they had some good offensive linemen. Matt Lee of Miami was one of the offensive linemen there. It's going to be a late round pick. And Boyd just took these guys. McCormick of South Dakota State had a great game against him. He was one of the most talked about players of the combine who was not at the combine. I have him as a 5th round pick. He could go in the 4th round, but if he's there in the 5th round and the Dolphins want a good value at defensive tackle, small school guy, Christian Boyd out of Northern Iowa.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about Tua's brother, who a lot of people felt was a combine snub. Do you see him getting drafted, and what kind of NFL future does he have?
I mean, I have him as a potential 7th round pick. Played at Maryland. He was a good quarterback at Maryland. Entered the transfer portal this year. Then he decided to enter the draft. He doesn't have the same arm as his older brother, but he's got it going on between the ears. He's very elusive. He makes good decisions. I was at the Ohio State game where he almost beat Ohio State. Doesn't force the ball. Just doesn't have great physical skills. If he gets drafted, I think it's going to be in the 7th round. And I can absolutely see him making a roster as that 3rd emergency quarterback. He's one of those quarterbacks that's good to have on the sideline just to have another pair of eyes.
Mm-hmm. Well, definitely, Tony. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your work. I've always been a fan of you for over 20 years. Tony, tell the people where they can find your work.
Well, as I tell my wife, just Google my name and you'll find out where I am. Go to Sportskeeda. You know, we just got off we just finished the combine, and you know what that means? It's pro day month, and we already had our first. I already posted the first pro day report from Purdue and Northwestern. We'll have a lot of pro day information moving forward. Obviously, we've got the mock draft simulator at Sportskeeda, which is one of the best out there. It's free. You can be your own GM. You can run a mock draft simulation for your favorite team for 1 round, 3 rounds, 7 rounds, be 450 players, at least 450 players that are graded with scouting reports. So a lot more coming.
All right. Well, again, we appreciate your time. And as everybody knows, you can find our work at alldolphins.com for free, no paywall, no subscription. And you know how to find us on the podcast. We're here Monday through Friday, and we'll probably be doing extra days because free agency is right around the corner, Tony. Who's your free agent sleeper, Tony? Who's the one player that you say team better go get?
Listen, I'm a draft guy. I don't know. I mean, I think Jonah Williams of Cincinnati is actually a interesting prospect if he's willing to move inside, because I think he could be a good guard, maybe a good potentially center. I always thought that was his best position. I thought he was out of position. I never thought he was a left tackle. I never thought he was a right tackle, which he was last year at Cincinnati. I think he can be a real good interior offensive lineman if he has that mindset, if he's willing to do it. Don't know it's going to cost you a lot of money. You know, I mean, I think that's something, if he is willing to consider that transition to center or even guard. I think a couple teams in the AFC, whether it be the Dolphins, whether it be the New York Jets, who are desperate for offensive linemen, that's got to be a consideration.
No.
Listen, interesting story by Jonah Williams. According to Steve Ross, the Dolphins were planning to pick him instead of Christian Wilkins until he got selected by Cincinnati. And then the Dolphins settled on Christian Wilkins. True story. So
I think the Dolphins made out well in that one.
Yeah, definitely. And they can still get their shot at Jonah Williams. Well, Tony, we appreciate your time. We thank you for joining us, and we will see you guys tomorrow.